Hello, and welcome to Sobercast, where we provide AA speaker meetings and workshops in podcast format. We're an ad-free podcast, and if you enjoy listening, please help us be self-supporting by visiting Sobercast.com, look for the donate link, and drop $1 or $2 into our virtual basket. We hope you enjoyed the podcast. Have a great day.
Thanks, Mel. Hi, everyone. My name is George, and I'm an alcoholic and from Nobleton, Ontario. I'm in the King City group, but I'm not in Nobleton right now. I'm in Florida. The sun is shining, and it's nice and warm here. Don't want to get anybody jealous out there. But, you know, that's the gift of sobriety, eh? That's what happens when we get sober and we do this thing that allows us to be happy, joyous, and free. And I'm not saying that everybody gets sober gets to go to Florida. That's not the point I'm making. But the point that I am making is that because I'm sober and because I have my priorities in the right place, I'm able to be here, right? And I've been able to been taught certain things in Alcoholics Anonymous and live my life in a certain way that has allowed me to have some nice things in my life, family, friends, you people. You know, when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, we used to talk about the 4 crosses. We had our AA on the top, we had family, we had our jobs, and we had our social lives. And if we were doing all these things, we had something called balance. And if we didn't do one of these things, then our balance would be off. We wouldn't have balance. So I'm going to talk today about alcoholism, a disease of perception. My late sponsor, Clancy, coined that whole ideology and that whole concept many years ago. And I found that to be true with this illness of alcoholism. My sobriety date is September the 15th of 1991. So I've been here a little while. And I've gone through many things in Alcoholics Anonymous. I heard a lady here, I think her name was Jackie, who just lost her husband. My condolences to you. I know what it feels like to lose a spouse because I lost 2 of them here. I was married twice in I'm married 3 times now, but I was married twice in Alcoholics Anonymous, and both my wives passed away at different times, obviously. And because of you people and a loving God that I have in my life, I was able to get through that without having to take a drink. You know, I've come to understand that alcoholism is a disease of perception, and I'll talk about that because that's what I'm here to do today. You know, my perceptions can get distorted when I get too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, for instance. I'm not taking care of myself. You know, the book says our problem centers in our minds. So I have an obsession of the mind. Okay? And if I'm not taking care of that obsession of the mind, if, for instance, I get a resentment and I don't deal with that resentment, my perceptions can get distorted. I get angry, or I'm practicing defects, and I'm not taking care of those defects. You know, calling a sponsor, for instance. You know, allowing my sponsor to impose their clear perceptions on my distorted perceptions. Right? Because alcoholism, as I said, is a disease of perception, I've come to learn. You know, when the brain of the alcoholic goes under conflict, stress, pressure, the brain of the alcoholic gets altered. There's another word for that. It's called delusion. We use it in our big book. We have 100 forms of self-delusion. Bill put that in the big book because he doesn't want to get too complex by using a word like psychosis. But that's what that is. If you open a dictionary and you read delusion, you're going to see it's a form of psychosis. So when if I'm not taking care of me and I get too hungry, angry, lonely, and tired, or I do get, resentments, as I said, or anger or whatever, then suddenly things start looking different to me than they were before. I got to be careful of stuff like that. Oh, they're not doing AA the way that we used to do it when I got sober. Oh, they said this at the meeting. They said that at the meeting. And suddenly my perceptions get more negative and negative and negative as opposed to being positive. So I got to be very, very careful of that. The illness centers in our minds. So if, for instance, I am, say I was drinking. Okay, I'll use this. Say I was drinking and I was sober for a while. And I pick up a drink. It instantly alters my perception of reality. Things start looking different than they really are. You ever notice that? You're restless, irritable, discontent. I remember when I was restless, irritable, discontent, I picked up a drink and, the whole world changed. Had 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 drinks, everything was okay. Really, nothing changed. Only my perception of it changed. Everything was still the same. That's what makes alcohol so fatal for someone like me. I've come to understand that my problem is not alcohol. If alcohol was my problem, all I would have to do is stop drinking. I wouldn't need AA for that. I remember my sponsor talking to me or talking about this when he sat with Bill Wilson in 1963 in his office. And Bill was of the same opinion, that we don't have an alcohol problem, we have the disease of alcoholism. It's a big difference. I was 2 years sober. Mr. AA, you know how you are when you're 2 years sober? You got your AA cape on and yahoo, let's go. And I got in a conflict with my wife. We got into an argument. And it was just like, I don't know if you ever remember that. Some of you are old enough to remember The Odd Couple, Oscar Madison and Felix Unger. It was a sitcom. And in the beginning of it, a door opened for Tony Randall, and his wife dropped his bag and shut the door. That was exactly the scene at our place. And so I grabbed the bag and I was hitchhiking on the highway. I got off at a place called Burlington, Ontario, and in Burlington, I got off and I called my wife and we talked on the phone, and then I went back on the highway, started hitchhiking back, and suddenly in my mind, a perception came. You know something, George? Why don't you just throw yourself under the Mack truck? And I was considering it. That perception was not a clear perception. That is a distorted perception. Bill says in the 12 and 12, in the 11th step, our human tendencies to rationalize distort our so-called guidance. That's what that's about. He uses distorted guidance. Same thing. Perceptions got distorted. So when I was on that highway, suddenly Clancy's voice came to me. And I had just heard him talk we had tapes in those days. And this is what he said, which changed my life. He said, if my problem is alcohol, I cannot be an alcoholic. Conversely, if I'm an alcoholic, my problem is not, I cannot be alcohol. It sounds like an alcohol problem, but our brain dilutes what it really is. It's something called alcoholism. And the difference between an alcohol problem and the disease of alcoholism is quite simple. You got an alcohol problem, all you got to do is stop drinking and go about your merry way. With a disease of alcoholism, When we stop drinking, our life becomes so unbearable we can't live in it. And there I was on the highway contemplating suicide. That's not sober thinking. So I got a ride. I went into St. Catharines. I went to my home group. I helped set up the chairs. I talked to a member. I went home and then it went from there. But it was never the same again for me after that, because it hit me because I experienced it. Experience and its lesson. And I moved along, and when I was 5 years sober, my wife had gotten sick, and when I was 5 years sober, I connected with Clancy, and he was with me for 24 years until he died. And I talked to him all the time and questioned him, and really, it was very interesting that he showed me by his actions that I needed to stay active in Alcoholics Anonymous. Because when I was active in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I still am today, my perceptions stay clear. They're positive perceptions. When I start criticizing and I start putting myself into situations where they're negative, then my perceptions can become negative too. It's not anybody else's fault but mine. You see? So I have to always be careful of that. That's why prayer and meditation are important to me. Right? So I can stay in conscious contact with life, good, and God. To me, they're synonymous. They all mean the same thing. I live in a world where I get, there's problematic areas. Like I said, I got married a second time. My second wife died of brain cancer. He was 48 at the time, very young. And when that happened, I was in the hospital room, and so were sisters and mom. And the last thing that I said to her, because I had a funny feeling she was going to die, because I'd seen people die before. I had a funny feeling she was going to take her last breath. And I said, "Darling, the angels are here. God loves you, and I love you." She took her last breath. And in that, I could feel right after she took her last breath, I could feel there was an energy in that room. I didn't say anything to anybody. I didn't want them to all think that I lost my mind. But I could feel her spirit. It says in our book on page 55 that the fundamental idea of God is in every man, woman, and child. You see, I felt that energy when she died coming out of her. But I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't have you people, if I didn't have my sponsor, if I didn't have the teachings of Alcoholics Anonymous and the applications of the 12 steps. It wouldn't have been impossible for me to do that. So I was able to get through that with the help of you people. I allowed, for instance, I'll give you an example of allowing my sponsor to impose their clear perceptions on my distorted perceptions. When my first wife died, I was living in a place called Cambridge, which was about an hour and 15 minutes from where I got sober. I got sober in the Niagara region. And so some people came up and they got me and they took me back to the Niagara region, and we had the funeral down there. But before the funeral, I was talking with my stepdaughter, and my granddaughter, who was 8 years old at the time, didn't feel like going to the funeral. And her mother allowed her to make that decision. And that upset me. because I felt that she should have been there for her grandmother's funeral. And so I called Clancy. And here's where, and this is where it becomes a disease of perception. My perceptions were so angry and distorted, okay, that I was going to say something and I was going to make a big fuss and a big deal out of this with my stepdaughter. Clancy said to me, George, you just take care of what you got to take care of, the funeral, and you stay focused and don't worry about who's coming and who isn't coming. And call me tomorrow. See? And then everything became okay. I listened to what he had to say, and I kept my mouth shut. See, I allowed him to impose his clear perceptions on my distorted perceptions. Prior to that, when I was 10, this is by the time this happened, I must have been, I think I was 16 years sober when this happened. When I was 10 years sober, I was working in the field. I've been in the field of addiction and alcoholism for over 20 years. So I was working in the field and I was just about to do a group. And I found this picture. I don't know where the heck it came from. It was on me. I found it. And it was this guy with a hockey stick standing beside me. And I had a hockey stick on and my skates and a Toronto Maple Leafs jersey on. And I was going to play hockey. And I just froze. Because this guy did some stuff to me when I was a kid. And I thought that I had dealt with this. And I just froze. And I was like, I was at work. So I called Clancy. And he said, kid, and I told him what was going on. He said, kid, you're okay. All right, don't worry about this. He said some stuff, and I'm not going to get into what he said. But I allowed him to impose his clear perceptions on my distorted perceptions. I trusted him enough that everything was going to be okay. I went downstairs, I did the group, and it never bothered me again. Ever. And that's been over 20 years. 21 years, actually. You see, disease of perception. You know, there's four lethal feelings in the victimization role. And that causes a distorted perception of reality too, when we become victims all the time and we can't recover from victimization. Okay, so one would be a growing resentment for those that did it to me. Okay, that's one. Two, intermittent feelings of self-pity. Three, feelings of difference. That's when you don't know what you feel anymore. And a fourth thing's happened. I'm not really an alcoholic. This was done to me. That's what happens in the victimization role. You know, it says in our book on page 31, it says self-deception. Hold on. I'll read it exactly because I don't want to make a mistake. Despite all we can say, many who are real alcoholics are not going to believe they're in that class. By every form of self-deception and experimentation, they will prove themselves exceptions to the rule, therefore non-alcoholic. That's what happens with the victimization role. When we stay victims enough, that's what happens. The deception starts to come in. And this was done to me. I'm not really an alcoholic. You did this to me, or they did this to me. And if they wouldn't have done this to me, I wouldn't be in this situation. It justifies every drink I ever take, the victimization. So that's why steps 8 and 9 are so crucial in our program, because I have come to understand that Alcoholics Anonymous is the most successful treatment for the disease of alcoholism in 7,000 years of recorded history. And I believe the reason for that is because step 8 and 9. Because we're dealing with the recovery from victimization. Which, when we start to recover from victimization, perceptions will start to change. My perceptions are not going to be the perceptions of being a victim. They're going to be perceptions of being recovered. That's why it's so important to understand that we're recovered alcoholics. That's what our book tells us. I'm recovering. I'm 30 years sober and recovering. Oh, really? Were you recovering still? That means that you're not well. That means that you don't want to get well. Okay? You know, Bill says that we've known hundreds of men and women who is worse as Bill, and there is a solution. It says nearly all have recovered. They have solved their drink problem. I just want to make sure that I quoted that correctly because I don't want to. We have alcoholics know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all have recovered. They've solved their drink problem. So that's what we've done. We've solved our drink problem and we've recovered from our drink problem. We're not cured of alcoholism. What we're given is a daily reprieve contingent upon the maintenance of our spiritual condition. That's why I've come to believe that alcoholism is a disease of perception. It's step 2 work. You know, this insanity that they talk about, that we talk about in the second step, it's not the same things we did when we were drinking that Bill was talking about there. It's the insane thinking we do when we're stone cold sober to think that we can drink again. But that's a process, huh? It just doesn't come, oh, you know, I'm 40 years sober, I've just picked up a drink today. No, it's a process. The relapse happened way before we picked up a drink. The perceptions were distorted way before we picked up a drink. We stopped maybe going to meetings. We stopped calling our sponsor on a regular basis. We stopped doing inventories on a regular basis. We stopped helping people on a regular basis. We stopped applying the traditions to our lives on a regular basis. And suddenly everything starts to become bleak. And little bit by little, it starts to get darker and darker. Right? You know, when we say recovered, and I just noticed it on the bottom, we've recovered from a hopelessly seeming state of mind and body. To show others precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. That's the main purpose of what we're doing here. But that still doesn't mean that at times perceptions can get distorted. That's why it's a disease of perception. You know, it's like a TV set. You're watching your favorite program, whatever it is. Okay. Yesterday, the day before yesterday, it was Sunday here, everywhere else, hopefully in the world. Sometimes they're hours ahead. But here in North America, we have what we call on Sundays NFL football. Huh? A lot of people like the football games in the States, let me tell you. Now, if you're on the right channel, you're going to get the game at 1 o'clock Eastern, right? If you're in Pacific time, then you're going to get it before. If you're in Central time, you're even going to get it before that. But if you're not on the right channel, you're not going to get the picture. Huh? You're not going to get it. But say you are on the right channel and you're watching the picture, and suddenly there's a little storm going on outside. Or maybe somebody's played around with your antenna or something. The picture then gets distorted, eh? You try to adjust it with the TV, not with the TV converter. It's not working. Everything's all over the place. Huh? You're going to have to call the TV repairman. Huh? Oh, that doesn't make anybody very happy when they're watching their favorite show. But here comes along the TV repairman. And he fixed the TV set. And then they adjust the knobs on the TV set, and it makes the picture clear again. Well, that's the job of the sponsor. Huh? So the sponsor does. Comes along and adjusts the knobs on the TV set. Because it's a disease of perception. And sometimes we can get so enthralled that we can't see it. Oh, I'm doing good. Everything's great over here. How many people have you all known that have killed themselves in sobriety? I've known many. And everybody always thought they were doing so well. Huh? That disease of perception. When somebody goes out there and kills themselves, they're in a form of psychosis. That means perceptions are not clear. And more alcoholics die sober than they do drinking. Huh? Because drinking is a relief. Sobriety is what's untenable. Sobriety is what's unbearable if you have the disease of alcoholism. A lot of people come to AA, and there's many different type of alcoholics as well. And I'll touch on that too. But they all come here, and some of them stay here year after year after year after year, ruining newcomers. They tell them they don't have to do a 4-step. You don't have to do the steps. I've been here 30 years, and everything's great. I put the plug in the jug, and great. Everything's great. That kills people around here. I'm going to touch on A, B, and C. I'm going to start from C. C. These are the types of alcoholics. They call them, in the big book, they call them heavy drinkers. But today they call them alcoholics. These are people that got into trouble with alcohol. Their families are pissed off. Their boss is pissed off. Their friends are pissed off. And suddenly, maybe their health isn't that great. And given sufficient reason, they stop drinking. And they go about their merry way. Some of them get involved with their churches, and some of them get more involved with the families and with their families, and everything is great. Then there's the B type. The B type of people who the treatment centers and the detoxes were made for, actually. These were people that got physically addicted to alcohol, okay? And they needed to get medically withdrawn. There's two substances that'll kill you in a withdrawal. Alcohol and barbiturates, okay? So what happens with this is that they detox us medically. I used to work in a medical detox. Okay, we give the patient. They come in. If they're addicted to alcohol, we give them a medication that stops them from having seizures, so they don't die. If they're addicted to barbiturates, the same thing. Okay. If they're addicted to narcotics, depending on what type of narcotics, they'll get different type of medication for the withdrawal. So that way it won't be as uncomfortable for them. So, and then some of them, they'll go through the detox, and then some of them want to go to a treatment center. And they'll go to a treatment center. Will they give them more information to what's wrong with them? They might do some internal work with them for 30 days or 60 days or 90 days. And then suddenly they come out of that treatment center. And now they either A, come to AA, or B, they don't need to come to AA. They go back to their families. They get back into their churches, perhaps, and they live a happy and normal life. There's a treatment facility in the States here in Seattle called Shadell. They have pages of hundreds and hundreds of people who got well, and they'd never come to AA, of alcoholics of those type. I used to work with a young lady who graduated from that treatment center. She never came to AA, and her life is great. Then there's the A type. The A type is people like me, and I presume people like you on this video, on this Zoom call. People who, when we stopped drinking, our life becomes so unbearable we couldn't live in it. You know, I remember one time, and I'll never forget this as long as I live. Clancy got double booked. He booked himself to Philadelphia. Somehow this happened, and he was in his late 80s by this time. Booked himself to Philadelphia, and then he had to go from Philadelphia, I think, to Washington, catch another plane, and come to Cambridge. And they picked him up at the Toronto airport to bring him to Cambridge to talk. He was so tired. And he walked into the room. We sat down, and then he came up. He walked up to the microphone, and this is the first thing that he said, and I never forgot it. I won't forget as long as I live. He said this: if you think that alcohol is your problem, you're going to die of alcoholism. That's how he started his talk. I never heard him say, I heard many ways that he put that through the years, but I never heard him put it that way. Maybe because he was tired, but let me tell you something. He hit the ball. He hit the gold buzzer on that one, because it's true. If you think that alcohol is your problem and you have the disease of alcoholism, you're going to die of it. Because it's the disease of alcoholism is not an alcohol problem. Alcohol is a solution to the disease of alcoholism, because the perceptions of the alcoholic get so skewed and so dark at times that the only thing that'll take me out of that is a drink or the 12 steps or suicide. So take your pick. But that's what happens to, those are the three different types of alcoholics. Now in our big book, Dr. Silkworth talks about 9 different types, 4 in the chapter to the wives and 5 in the doctor's opinion. I was just reading the chapter to the wives because we're doing a book facility. Me and somebody else had to do, for the last 10 weeks, we've been doing a book workshop with people in our group. So it's important for me to stay on top of this. It's important for me to take a regular inventory. You know, that means that I have to watch for things like selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, fear. I have to watch for other defects, you know, perhaps ego, perhaps control, impatience, and intolerance. Right? So anytime I'm disturbed, what's the problem? I'm the problem. There's something wrong with me. What's wrong with me? I'm disturbed. So I need to talk about this. I need to get these down on paper. Now they have computers and texts and everything. And I have to get it out of me. Get it out. You see, it's we take inventory spiritually, physically, emotionally, and mentally. That's what an inventory is. A solid inventory in whatever level you're doing that at a 10th step or a 4th step. That's what an inventory is. We take it at those 4 levels. We're taking it physically. We're writing it. We're taking it mentally. Obviously, we have to know what we're writing. We're taking it spiritually from the inside. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. And then something happens. You know, he talks about this in the 10th step very nicely. He says, we've entered the world of the spirit. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. The realm of the spirit to me is just reality. It's a change of perception. The 12 steps do for me slowly what alcohol did for me quick. alters my perception of reality. The more work that I do, and the more vigilant I keep myself with this illness and grow through the trying times. And trust me, I've had trying times here. I've shared a couple of things with you. Not to mention, I've also had grandchildren passing away. My daughter passed away. All these things. And it alters perception because emotionally, when emotionally something is going on with me, if I'm not careful, it'll alter my perception. It'll change the way I see things emotionally. When emotion and the brain connect, for the alcoholic of my description, if I'm not careful, the emotions always overtake us. That's why we have some things like, Bill writes, self-restraint is a top priority, he writes in the 12. Top priority. That means it's very important. I have to watch myself, right? Not to react inappropriately. I want to talk about the higher power of it, or the power greater than myself in this. Because I believe that has a lot to do with keeping our perceptions clear as well. If I get self-obsessed, right? Clancy used to say, every time I have some difficulty or whatever, complaining about something, he says, "Kid, you're getting self-obsessed again, really, eh? You have self-obsessed." Chuck Chamberlain used to say, obsession is ego. Huh? Exception is just ego. Obsession is ego. I separate myself from you. Huh? If I'm starting to obsess about things, I need to look at that. Because the obsession will start to make things gray in my perceptions, will start to make things not look the right way when I'm obsessing. So the opposite of obsession is clarity, is contentment. It's contentment. So obsession, got to talk to sponsor about that. You see, that's another thing. Talk to a sponsor about obsession. Get obsession, the ego's running it. Talk to the sponsor. Right? One alcoholic talking to another alcoholic to reduce their feelings of my case is different. Just enough that they can take actions which they don't believe in taking. They're doing that to get out of the obsession, whatever that obsession may be for. You see, Bill said something very interesting in AA Comes of Age. He said, it's the obsessions that lead up to the obsession that causes us to take a drink and go mad and die. He said that. Interesting. So I need to uncover, discover, and discard any obsession that comes in my way. Because it's all children of ego. Okay? So, the work never ends here. It never ends. I don't believe that this work ever ends. The 11th step on page 86 says, after we reviewed our day at nighttime, we ask God's forgiveness if we've gotten resentful, if we've hurt ourselves. We practice some defects of character. I always say, God, please forgive me for hurting myself when I retire at night. If I've hurt myself, if I've gotten resentful in a situation. Because I want to stay in the sunlight of the Spirit. I don't want to get to a dark place of the soul. You see? And that's and that's what I try to do here, with your help. So I got to have the 3 P's around here: people, program, and prayer. 3 P's. And God, guts, and gratitude. Right? Because if I don't have those things, then I'm in trouble. And you know what trouble for the alcoholic is? And I learned this a long time ago. Trouble is not drinking, going to jails, or having an argument with the family, or losing your job. That's not trouble for the alcoholic. You know what trouble is for the alcoholic? When they can't get rid of themselves, that's trouble. There was a time I couldn't get rid of myself. That's trouble for the alcoholic. You see? And so, with the 12 steps and you people, I was able to get rid of myself. See, the whole point of the 11th step, for instance, the whole point of it is to die of self. That's the whole point of it. And to have a healthy self, to have a God self, if you will, instead of a false self. Right? So that's the work. The whole program is based on 3 things: to uncover, discover, and discard. That's what it is, the whole program. That uncover, discover, and discard on a regular basis. Since what last week got here on the we left on the 31st of December from Canada. We drove a friend out with their car here to West Palm Beach, to Florida. And my wife and I stayed with her friend. And then my wife went back on the 8th to Canada, and I'm here until the 12th with a guy that I sponsor. Right? And I was able to, and my dad lives close to here too. I was able to sit down with my father, and the 2nd of January was my birthday. I'm 62 years old now. I've been here more than half my life. And we hadn't been together for my birthday since 1978. That's a long time. Some of you guys weren't even born then. Right? Okay? And what a beautiful day. What a beautiful evening we had. Him and I, we had lunch together, and then some days later we had a lunch brunch with my wife and my stepmom and him. There's just beautiful stuff that happens when you're sober and in your right mind. You can be sober around here and just stop drinking, and perceptions could be right off. It says it in our book. By the ninth step, it says that he who has just, thinks that sobriety is enough is, what does it say here? The alcoholic, here we go. The alcoholic is like a tornado. It doesn't say when he's drunk either. It says like a tornado, or she. The alcoholic is like a tornado, roaring his way through the lives of others. It says his, sorry, my mistake. Hearts are broken, sweet relationships are dead, affections have been uprooted, selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. We feel a man or a woman is unthinking when he or she says that sobriety is enough. He is like the farmer who came out of his cyclone cellar to find his home in ruin. To his wife, he remarked, "Don't see anything the matter here, Ma. Ain't it grand? The wind stopped blowing." Yeah. There's a lot of people come here and just stay in that state. Not, and it's not a healthy state to be in. That's why if you wake up to the fact that alcoholism is a disease of perception, then you can start to do something about it. I had to really, really get going on that and really start to understand that. I was, I can't remember now, maybe 3 years sober or something. This was after that I heard Clancy talk about the disease of perception. I was driving my grandson home we lived in Crystal Beach to Niagara Falls. And on the way back, I stopped at the lights. And then it went green and I made a left-hand turn. I was going to the bar. I forgot about my wife. I forgot about AA. I was on my way to the bar. I made that left turn. And suddenly I heard in the voice, Clancy's voice in the back of my head. When the brain under significant amount of stress or pressure cannot find any release, the brain of the alcoholic will induce psychosis. Things are temporary psychosis. Things are going to look different than they really are. I turned my car around. I went home. I told my wife what happened, and I called my sponsor, and we laughed and we chucked it away. You see, you never know. You just never know. And you know what? Looking back at it, I don't think I was under any stress or pressure, but maybe I was. You know, I really, at that time, I can't, it just happens. That's why I have to have, for me, one hand in AA, one hand in my higher power, which to me now are all the same. But it has to be there for me. You know, that's the nature of the third step. Make a decision to want this way of life. You know, Alcoholics Anonymous is like the mafia. Once you get in, you never get out alive, eh? That's what happens around here, eh? We get in here, and this is our design for living. If we have the disease of alcoholism, this is where we must stay. Right? There's no safe. You can't tell an alcoholic what to do, but there is musts in the big book. Right? This is where someone like me has to stay in order for me to stay alive in this world without having to pick up a drink. Because this is not about drinking, like I said before. This is about a disease of perception that'll warp me around to think that I'm okay to pick up a drink. You see? The problem centers in the mind of the alcoholic and also their body. I'm allergic to alcohol. I'm always going to be allergic to alcohol. I hear sometimes that I've heard in meetings that, you know, people say, I used to be powerless over alcohol. I'm not anymore because I got a power greater than myself. Oh, really? Put alcohol in your system and see what happens. Huh? Take a drink of alcohol and see what happens. You see, so this allergy, I have to take care of and be aware of myself, right, on an ongoing basis. You know, there was, I like to talk about this because this is a perception concept too. And it's based around the 11th step. There was a guy named Thomas Merton, who they rated the greatest theologian in the last century. And Thomas Merton, I believe he was born in England and he came to the States. And he was a monk. And he booked himself in a Trappist monastery in Gethsemane, Kentucky. And he was there from 13 to 18 years in silent meditation of God's will. That's a long time to be quiet, eh? Huh? And when he got out of there, he didn't know what God's will was. And he wrote something like this, and I have it in my big book's in the other room, so I'm not going to go get it. But he wrote something like this, and it goes like this. It says, "Dear God, I have no idea where I'm going. I do not see the road ahead of me. And though I think that I'm following your will, does not actually mean that I'm doing so. But I believe this. I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you, and I hope I don't have it. I hope I have that desire in everything I do." And it goes on. So if a guy like that doesn't know what God's will is, I don't think I'm going to find out by tomorrow. So all I know is that for me, God's will is just practicing the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't want to be nor heavenly bound nor earthly good around here. if I practice honesty, open-mindedness and willingness, and courage, and integrity and dignity, and patience and tolerance, and humility and brotherly love and forgiveness, self-restraint, spiritual awareness. And Dr. Bob said we could put our 12 steps together with 2 words, love and service. If I'm practicing all these things to the best of my ability, that's the closest I want to be to God's will. That's why I still do, I do a 20-minute meditation. I do readings every day. I do my 3rd step prayer, 7-step prayer, 11-step prayer. I do this new prayer that I learned on Zoom, the set-aside prayer. I love that set-aside prayer. Oh, that's a really nice prayer. And in closing, I do this prayer, and I'm going to pass it on to you. And I want to thank you very much for allowing me to come here today and to share with you. It goes like this. Thank God for you, good friend of mine. Seldom is a friendship such as thine. How very much I wish to be as helpful as you have been to me. Of many prayer guests one thou art, on whom I ask God to impart rich blessings from his storehouse rare, and grant to you his gracious care. As I recall from time to time how you have inspired this heart of mine, I find myself inclined to pray, God bless my friend this very day. So often at the throne of grace, here comes the picture of your face. And then instinctively I pray that God may guide you all the way. Someday I hope with you to stand before the throne of God's right hand and say to you at journey's end, praise God, you've been to me a friend. Thank God for you. And thanks very much, Mel and T, for asking me to come here today. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Sobercast is ad-free, and we'd like your help in order to keep it that way. So if you'd like to help us be self-supporting by pledging $1 or $2 a month, visit Sobercast.com and look for the donate links. Thank you very much.